Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our CAT series. We'll be looking at the VA section of Slot 2, CAT 2024. We are starting this set. The first question here is a paragraph completion type of question. All right. An easy one to do. There are clear clues. This is definitely something that can be attempted. All right. So let's take a look at the passage, the sentence first. Yet, each day. Okay. So please note that the given sentence starts with a yet. Okay. So the yet implies a contradiction to whatever sentence comes before it. All right, so that's significant. Transition words are important. Yet, each day, the flock produced eggs with calcareous shells, though they apparently had not ingested any calcium. Okay, so you had the flock, that is, we presume we're referring to hens here. Yes, so they produced eggs with calcareous shells, though they had apparently not ingested any calcium from land, which was entirely lacking in limestone. Now, what does the passage itself tell us? Early in this century, a young Breton schoolboy who, preparing himself for a scientific career, began to notice a strange fact about hens in his father's poultry yard. Okay, then you have your first blank. Yes, so does the sentence fit in here? Yet each day the flock produced eggs. Okay, it is not yet time for this sentence, not in this passage, not at this point, because it says yet. Okay, so it's a strange fact, and the sentence itself does provide the strange fact. Okay, so why would we put a yet there? There shouldn't be a contradiction, right? So we continue. The second sentence says, as they scratched the soil, they constantly seemed to be pecking at specks of mica, a siliceous material dotting the ground. Okay, and that is the strange fact that is mentioned in the first sentence. So there is definitely a direct connection between sentences 1 and 2. Okay, so it is not to be put in blank 1. All right, now do we put it here? Yet each day the flock produced eggs with calcareous shells, though they had apparently not ingested any calcium. Okay, now the previous sentence talks about mica. All right, so to from that to suddenly jump to calcium doesn't make any sense. Yes, so we don't put it in blank 2 either. No one could explain to Louis Kervran why the chickens selected the mica. Okay, so no one could explain why the chickens selected the mica, or why each time a bird was killed for the family cooking pot, no trace of the mica. So each time the bird was killed, there could be no trace of mica found in its gizzard, right? So it was pecking at, that is what that's a strange fact, right? It was, the hens were pecking at specks of mica and constantly. All right, but nobody could explain why they selected the mica, nor could anyone explain why it was that if they had ingested it, if they had swallowed it, then when the bird was killed, they should have found it in the gizzard. All right, so now here comes the sentence, yet each day. Okay, so no one could explain this, but, right, so the previous sentence very clearly leads to the contradiction. Yet each day the flock produced eggs with calcareous shells, though they apparently had not ingested any calcium, which was entirely lacking in limestone. Okay, the next sentence says, it took Kervran many years to establish that the chickens were transmuting one element into another. Right, now with the previous sentence I had mentioned, with the previous blank I had mentioned that the sentence talks about mica and then we don't jump to calcium. Yes, it does happen with blank 3, right? The previous sentence is also talking about the mica, but here it makes sense because of the next sentence, which says, it took Kervran many years to establish that the chickens were transmuting one element into another. Yes, so that is why option 3, right? So blank 3, option 1 is the yes. We have here a summary based question. So what does this paragraph say? We're looking for a summary, so we need to look for the key points in the passage. recent important scientific findings. Okay, so recent important scientific findings have emerged from crossing the boundaries of scientific fields. Okay, so this is significant. Crossing the boundaries of scientific fields. They stem from, that is, the findings. Okay, they stem from physicists collaborating with biologists, sociologists, and others to answer questions about our world. All right. So the findings stem from physicists collaborating with biologists, sociologists, and others to answer questions about our world. But physicists and their potential collaborators. Okay. So, but physicists and their potential collaborators often find their cultures out of sync. Okay. So there's a contradiction here. So it talks about collaboration, but there is also a contradiction that the physicists and their potential collaborators, often find their cultures out of sync. Yes, they don't match, they don't go together. For one, physicists often discard. Why is it that that happens? Okay, they often discard a lot of information, right? They get rid of it, they throw it away, they negate it or invalidate it, right? A lot of information while extracting broad patterns. Yes, so while they are trying to extract broad patterns, they discard a lot of information. For other scientists, information is not readily disposed. Further, many non-physicists are uncomfortable. Non-physicists, that is, the collaborators, are uncomfortable with mathematical models. Still, okay, but despite this, the desire to work on something new and different is real, and there are clear benefits from the collision of views. Okay, so there are clear benefits from the collision of views. So, which summary works best? Let's read the options. Physicists have successfully buried their differences on research methods applied in other fields. Okay, have successfully buried their differences, it says. Now, what is there in the passage to tell us that they have successfully buried their differences? While to a certain extent we may take recent important scientific findings, okay, that you could probably attribute to that, but let's look at the rest of the sentence. Buried their differences on research methods applied in other fields. Yes, so the differences don't come from just that, right? It is on research methods applied in other fields. No, if anything, it is the research methods applied by the physicists that the collaborators are uncomfortable. Yes, so that's why you can't say that they have successfully, that physicists have successfully buried their differences. Yes, so option 1 is not the answer. Large data sets and mathematical models in physics research, combined with the research methods of non-physicist collaborators, have yielded important scientific findings, it says. Okay, so for one thing, the what is it that has yielded important findings? From the crossing of boundaries with other fields. Yes, so physics with biologists, sociologists, etc., etc., right? That's the idea. Now this attributes the results, the findings, to something completely different, which is the large data sets, okay, and mathematical models. Yes, so that combined with research methods of, yes, again it is talking about the research methods of non-physicist collaborators. Yes, which, as I mentioned with the previous option, the methods, if anything, are of the physicists, right? What do? They discard a lot of information while extracting broad patterns. They also use mathematical models, which non-physicists are uncomfortable with. Similarly, for the other sciences, information is not so easily thrown away, right? It's not so easily disposed of. Yes, so that is why option 2 also doesn't work. Then option 3 says, despite differences in their research styles. Now here is an option that seems to go along with, conform with whatever the passage says. Physicists' research collaborations with scholars from other disciplines have yielded important research findings. Yes, this goes along with whatever points we have looked at in the passage, right? That there are differences in the research styles, but still the research collaborations, which is an important word in this passage, right? Because the passage very clearly states in the beginning that it is the collaborations that have yielded important findings. Yes. Let's just take a look at option 4. The desire to diversify their research and answer important questions. Okay, there you go, right? And the desire to answer important questions is nowhere mentioned in the passage. Yes, has led to several collaborations between physicists and other social scientists. This doesn't say anything about the non-scientists being uncomfortable with the research methods of the physicists. Yes, so option 3 is the one that summarizes it the best. Okay, we have here another para completion question. Again, a very easy one, narrative in tone. Let's take a look at the sentence. Science has officially crowned us. Okay, so science has officially crowned us superior to our early rising brethren. Right, so this is what I meant by saying the tone is slightly sarcastic, mainly because of the words that are used. Right, so our early rising brethren refers to brothers, or basically other human beings. Yes, so science has officially crowned us, right? It has given us the tag, right? Or it has judged us to be superior to our early rising brethren, would imply that this is said by somebody who is a late riser, right? So let's see what the passage says. My fellow night owls, grab a strong cup of coffee and gather around. I have great news. Okay, so the tone is very, very conversational. Science has officially crowned us superior to our early rising brethren, right? While in the immediate flow of things, this might look like a good place to put this sentence. If you read the next sentence, it says, for a long time, our kind has been unfairly maligned. Okay, unfairly maligned, meaning we have been criticized and criticized unfairly, stereotyped as lazy and undisciplined. Okay, so that's the unfair maligning that has been done. Told we ought to be morning larks, right? Larks are a kind of bird which are up very early, so rising with the larks implies that a person gets up very early. Yes, advised to go to bed early so we can wake before 5 a.m. and run a marathon before breakfast, like all high flyers seem to do. Now, however, we are having the last laugh, right? So if you read on, you will see that what is said in the next 2 3 sentences, not the immediate sentence, not the second sentence, but if you read the sentences between blank 1 and blank 2, they imply the great news. All right, so that is the great news. So that's why we don't immediately put science has officially crowned us superior. We're not saying that. First, let's talk about us being maligned, right? Why we are maligned, how we are maligned, and then go on to say, right? Now, however, we are having the last laugh. Why are we having the last laugh? Because science has officially crowned us superior to our early rising brethren. All right, so it is not in blank 1. Blank 2 is a good place to put it. All right, let's look at the rest of the sentences. It may be a tad more, a little more complicated than that. What may be a tad more complicated than that? Right, that it is not just that we are considered superior to our early rising brethren, right? It's not just that we are no longer maligned, right? Why? He says there is a study that is backing it up. A study published last week, which you may have already seen while scrolling at 1 a.m., right? He continues to poke fun at that, suggests that staying up late could be good for brain power. Right? Is this study a thinly veiled PR exercise conducted by a caffeine pill company? Nope, it's legit, right? Legitimate. So, staying up late could be good for brain power. Okay, it says, is this study? So, a study published, and is this study? There's a question asked about the study. He goes on to give the answer, nope, it's legit, and then goes on to tell us why it is legit. Research led by academics at Imperial College London studied data on more than 26,000 people and found that self-declared night owls generally tend to have higher cognitive scores. All right. So yes, blank 2 is the best place to put it. Therefore, your answer is option 1. We have here another para completion question, right? This one actually might seem a little tricky. Para completion is something that can use grammar also, right? And this is a good example of that. I'll show you what I mean. So the sentence given here is, the Europeans did not invent globalization. Okay, so the Europeans did not invent globalization. Who did? We don't know, right? Let's see what the passage says. All right. The passage says the first phase of globalization occurred long before the introduction of either steam or electric power. Okay, so the sentence tells us the Europeans did not invent globalization. The first sentence of the passage says the first phase of globalization occurred long before the introduction of either steam or electric power. So, if at all you had to make it the introductory sentence, then it should have come before this, but we don't have that as an option. So that's ruled out. Chinese consumers at all social levels consumed vast quantities of spices, fragrant woods, and unusual plants. The peoples of Southeast Asia, peoples here refers to the various races, right, all put together. Peoples of Southeast Asia who lived in forests gave up their traditional livelihoods and completely reoriented their economies to supply Chinese consumers. Okay. Now, here, if you put the Europeans did not invent globalization, what does the next sentence say? These exchanges. All right. So it doesn't fit into blank one because there is nothing in either the previous sentence or the next sentence to tell us about Europeans inventing globalization. Right. These exchanges refers to supplying Chinese consumers, right? Giving up their livelihood to supply Chinese consumers. It also talked about Chinese consumers consuming vast quantities of spices, etc., etc. So that's what these exchanges refers to. Okay, so these exchanges of the year 1000 opened up some of the routes through which goods and peoples continued to travel after Columbus crossed the mid-Atlantic. Okay, then again, you say the Europeans did not invent globalization. Yes, then it goes on to say, yet the world of 1000 differed from that of 1492 in important ways. Okay, the travelers who encountered one another in the year 1000 were much closer technologically, right? So it doesn't fit into blank two either. Okay, so we rule out this option also. Okay, now comes, yes. So then you say, so the travelers who encountered one another in the year 1000 were much closer technologically. Now you say the Europeans did not invent globalization. They changed and augmented what was already there since 1000. Okay. Now, this is what I was talking about when I said grammar can sometimes help. Sometimes it can just be a simple pronoun or a tense, right? That helps us pinpoint that, okay, this is the connection between this sentence and this one, right? So you say the Europeans did not. So it goes on to talk about Columbus. Yeah. Peoples, so the exchanges opened up some of the routes to which goods and peoples continue to travel after Columbus traversed the Middle Atlantic. Yet the world of 1000 differed from that of 1492, which is when Columbus traveled, in important ways. The travelers who encountered one another in the year 1000 were much closer technologically, right? So there's your connection. Again, to negate the fact that Europeans did not invent, they are not the ones, it happened much before, right? So it says, so the Europeans did not invent globalization. What did they do? They changed, right? So they here referring to the Europeans, they changed and augmented. Augmented is made it better, right? Increased what was already there since 1000. Okay. So again, here, if you want to try and fit it in, the Europeans did not invent globalization. If globalization hadn't yet begun, Europeans wouldn't have been able to penetrate the markets in so many places as quickly as they did after 1492, right? But they've already said that they changed and augmented has already been said, right? So the they has to have something to refer to, which it wouldn't if you don't put the sentence in blank three, right? That's why option 3 is the correct choice. Yes, the blank 3, option 4 is the correct choice. We have here another summary type of question. This is again quite easy to do, right? So these are all fairly doable questions. Yes. So John Cleese told Fox News Digital that comedians do not have the freedom to be funny in 2022, right? So do not have the freedom to be funny. Yes. There's always been limitations on what they are allowed to say. I think it's particularly worrying at the moment. Okay. Particularly worrying at the moment because you can only create in an atmosphere of freedom, okay, where you're not checking everything you say critically before you move on. What you have to be able to do is build without knowing where you're going because you've never been there before, right? He says you should be able to build without knowing. You shouldn't have a clear cut path because you should be able to build on it. All right, that's what creativity is. You have to be allowed. Okay, that's what creativity is. You have to be allowed to build. And a lot of comedians are now sitting there, and when they think of something, they say something like, can I get away with it? I don't think so. So and so got into trouble, and he said that, oh, she said that. You see what I mean? And that's the death of creativity. Okay, so what are the points we're getting? It's about comedians. It's about how comedians don't have the freedom to be funny because they are constantly worried about what they're allowed to say. Yes. And that, according to John Cleese, is the death of creativity if they're not allowed to build. Right. So he says you have to be allowed to build. So if you're not allowed to do that, if they're constantly thinking about, will I get into trouble? Then he says that's the death of creativity. Okay. What options do we have? Comedians are being prevented from saying what they want, and that is the death of this art form. Okay, well, are being prevented, okay, you can still infer that, yes, from saying what they want. Okay, that is the death of this art, right? The problem with this particular option, while it does seem to sort of convey what the passage is saying, is it doesn't talk about freedom, right? The direct connection, it doesn't establish the direct connection between freedom and the death of creativity, right? So this is not a great option. Let's look further. Freedom and creativity are essential for comedy. Fear about offending people hinders originality. Yes, this covers what we just looked at, right? So this is a much better option than option one. All right. Please note, choose the option that best captures the essence of the passage. So sometimes you do have an option that looks possible, but there's another one that is more direct, covers the gist of the passage, that gets the essence of the passage, that covers the main points of the passage, right? So that's why two is better. Comedians must not check what they think and say. Okay, must not check what they think and say. They must go where no one has gone before. Makes a prescription, but John Cleese doesn't, right? John Cleese is saying that they should be allowed to build, right? But unfortunately, in this atmosphere, they're not being allowed to create, right? So the tone of option three is completely different. It is making a recommendation, a suggestion, right, which is not there in the passage. Creativity and critical thinking. There goes option four. Yes, it talks about checking everything you say critically, but that is not the same as critical thinking. Critical thinking is something that is not even mentioned in this passage, right? So yes, option two is the best choice. Okay, we have here a jumbled, an odd sentence type of question. So the jumbled paragraph, four of these sentences are connected to each other. One of them is the odd one out. Which one is it? Yes. So the UK is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, and the approval of a cultivated pet food is an important milestone. Okay, so this sentence tells us that the UK is a world leader. Okay, in what? In developing cultivated meat. Yes, and further, it has gone on to the approval of a cultivated pet food. Okay, so this is an important milestone in the UK. All right. If we are to realize the full potential benefits, okay, of cultivated meat, the government must invest in research and infrastructure. All right. Now, the previous sentence talks about how the UK is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, and the approval of a cultivated pet food is an important milestone, right? This sentence is talking about, in order to realize the full potential benefits, right? In order to get as much benefit of it as we can, the government must invest in research and infrastructure. There does seem to be a connection between sentences one and two, because the UK, so the government obviously represents the UK. Yes, so that could be, that could be a connection. And it talks about research and infrastructure, right? And this talks about how it is an important milestone. So maybe the UK has put in that investment. Yes, so there could be a connection between those two. The first UK applications for cultivated meat produced for humans remain under assessment with the Food Standards Agency. Okay, all right. So again, it is talking about the first UK applications for cultivated meat produced for humans remain under assessment. Yes. So cultivated meat, cultivated pet food for animals has been approved, Yes, it is a world leader in developing cultivated meat, so it is under assessment. So yes, there could be a connection between sentence 3 and the first two. Right, the previous UK government had been looking at fast tracking the approval of cultivated meat for human consumption. Now here we have a mention of the previous UK government, right, had been looking at fast tracking. Yes, this sentence is also talking about cultivated meat. Okay, but it says it had been looking at fast tracking the approval of cultivated meat for human consumption. Okay, so that implies that it had been looking at that, at fast tracking the approval. The previous sentence told us that it remains under assessment. So let's see. And then you have sentence 5, which says it underscores the potential for new innovation to help reduce the negative impacts of intensive animal agriculture. Okay, so what is it that underscores the potential for new innovation? Right, it could be, whatever has been mentioned in the previous sentences. Yes, so sentence 5 still does seem to go along with the idea. So what is the one now when it says it underscores is highlights. Yes, so it highlights the potential for new innovation to help reduce the negative impacts. All right, so this also seems to have a connection. The only one so far that doesn't seem to have that connection is option 4. Yes, because it is talking about, the others are talking about the UK being a world leader. It's talking about remaining under assessment with the Food Standards Agency. Yes, it talks about the approval of a cultivated pet food, investing in research and infrastructure, and all of that. Right, sentence 4 is the only one that seems to stand out because it is talking about the previous UK government and it is talking about fast tracking the approval, which implies that that hasn't happened as yet. Yes, whereas the other sentences imply that. Yes, so sentence 4 is the one that is yes. So here we have our first passage. It's a long passage, so that might put some people off, but it's actually a passage which is quite easy to understand. There's no complex language, right? The idea also is fairly easy to follow. All right, the passage basically talks about drivers for carnivore human attacks. Okay, so he says there are 3 other common drivers for carnivore human attacks. Okay, and he talks about how these drivers, as in the causes, basically, right, are more preventable, yes, than others. Okay, so he talks about these 3 common drivers, and out of them, they some of them are more preventable than others. He goes on to tell us what it is. There are natural aggression based conflicts, basically involving the protecting of their offspring or protecting a food source. Yes, so he says that can be prevented, that can be avoided. Yes, then he goes on to talk about how people taking pictures with animals or feeding them in natural settings, that's another one which he says causes them to lose their fear of humans. Right, generally animals are scared, wild animals are scared of humans, and that's one reason for them to stay away. Right, they generally do not attack out of choice, but if they get used to people, then that fear disappears, and that can lead to contact between humans and carnivores, and that would also lead to an attack. Yes, so that can be avoided as long as people don't try to take pictures with them or feed them in natural settings. Natural settings are national parks, sanctuaries, basically. Okay, then he also goes on to talk about certain situations where people are walking dogs or children are playing outside. So in certain areas where there are wild animals and wild animals can come into contact with human beings, with the children or with the dogs, that's another situation in which the attacks can happen. He says that again can be prevented, they could have been avoided if people were a little more careful. Yeah, then goes on to talk about climate change, but that is something that the passage says is still is in question. Okay, so this is what the passage talks about. Let's look at the questions. Which of the following statements, if false? Okay, so here I would say, if anything, the passage is easy enough to understand. The questions are a little tricky, especially this one. Yeah, so which of the following statements, if false, would be inconsistent with the concerns raised in the passage regarding the drivers of carnivore human conflicts? All right, so basically this translates to which of the following statements, if true, would be consistent with the concerns raised in the passage. Yes, so you invert it and that's what you get. All right. Now, with this particular passage, let's take a look at the options with this particular question. Carnivores lose their instinctive fear of humans when consistently exposed to human food sources. All right. Now, this is something that actually is mentioned in the first paragraph. Yeah. So it says here carnivores that recognize humans. Okay. From here, carnivores that recognize humans as a means to get food are a different story. As they become more reliant on human food, they might find at campsites or in rubbish bins, right? So this is mostly in the context, obviously, of this is in America, right? So that's why the mention of campsites. Yes, there are bears and skunks and those kind of animals that generally come into the campsites. So as they do that, they become less avoidant of humans. Losing that instinctive fear response puts them into more situations where they could get into an altercation. Altercation is nothing but a conflict with a human being, which often results in that bear being put down by humans, right? So obviously, the bear comes, looks for food because it knows it'll get food there, comes into contact with a human, attacks the human because it's afraid, right? And it's trying to protect its food or whatever. And unfortunately, that leads to the bear being killed by humans, right? Because obviously, if they attack, the humans will kill them. Yeah. A fed bear is a dead bear, says Servine, referring to a common saying among biologists and conservationists. Okay. So option one is actually something that would be consistent with what is said in the passage. All right. Let's put that on hold. And then we look at option two, which says human efforts to avoid risky behaviors around carnivores have proven effective in reducing conflict incidents. So human efforts to avoid risky behaviors have proven effective. We don't know. That is something the author actually warns against, right? He says that's a potential situation to create trouble. So it's not consistent with the concerns. Then, climate change has had negligible effects on the frequency of carnivore human interactions in affected regions. Now, climate change is mentioned in this paragraph. All right. So, what it says is experts believe climate change also plays a part in the escalation of human carnivore conflicts, but the correlation still needs to be ironed out. Okay. Is what the passage says. Yes, it goes on to say, as finite resources become scarcer, carnivores and people are coming into more frequent contact, which means that more conflict would occur. Says Jen Miller, International Program Specialist for the US Fish and Wildlife Service. For example, she says there was an uptick in lion attacks in Western India during a drought when lions and people were relying on the same water sources. Okay, so if this is true that climate change has had negligible effects, okay, on the frequency of carnivore human interactions in affected regions, this the answer should be that it is consistent with the concerns. Yes, because if false would be inconsistent, if true would be consistent. Yes, so this actually is the answer provided by the cat. Yes, so it is the answer being provided. Though an objection was raised, it has not been accepted. They say that this is the given answer. All right. Now, with this particular one, I would say there is a question mark to be raised because you very clearly get option one from paragraph one, whereas option three seems to be negated by the last but one paragraph. All right. So this is a question that I personally would take a call on, right? As in, I would probably go with option one. Yes. But yes, I need to mention that the given answer is option three. Okay. So I've also told you why I think three is not the answer. Yes. That it is because it says it plays a part. Probably that's the reason that the cat is giving this as the answer because the first part of sentence, the first sentence in this paragraph does say that climate change also plays a part in the escalation, right? The reason I negated it is the latter half of that sentence, which says, but the correlation still needs to be ironed out. All right. So I'm presenting both aspects to you. All right. It is a call to be taken, right? It's a judgment call that you make on the basis. So how do we answer a question? We answer a question based on what connections we can establish between the passage and the options, right? The most direct connection is always the one that we pick as the answer. Yes. Right. Sometimes we fail to see the connection. Yes. So there is that aspect also. Right. Now we look at option 4. Predatory attacks by carnivores are a common occurrence and have steadily increased over the past few decades. Actually, no, there are no predatory attacks. Predatory attacks would imply that the animals are attacking the humans for, because they see humans as food. No, that's not the discussion at all. It is about the, why there are carnivore human attacks, mainly because, they either see human food as a source, right, because of which, they try to protect that, right, or human beings put themselves in contact with the animals. Yes, so those are the reasons, the drivers that they are talking about. All right. Yes. We go on to the next question. According to the passage, what is a significant factor that contributes to the habituation of carnivores to human presence? All right. So, what is it that habituates them? What is it that gets them used to human presence? Yes. Let's take a look at the options because I've summarized the passage for you. The predatory perception of humans as potential prey within the carnivore's food chain. As I said with the last option for the previous question, there is no indication whatsoever of the predatory perception of humans, right? So they're not, the passage does not talk about human beings being considered potential prey by the carnivores, right? It's all situations where the humans and carnivores come into contact with each other for one reason or the other, and the carnivore ends up attacking the humans. And the author says these situations can be avoided. All right. Let's look at option 2. The natural aggression exhibited by carnivores exacerbated is made worse by human interference, particularly when they are safeguarding their offspring or food sources, right? The mention of this natural aggression is here. Okay. Natural aggression based conflicts, such as those involving females protecting their young or animals protecting a food source, can often be avoided as long as people stay away from those animals and their food. So there is no habituation here. There's no getting used to it. The author very clearly says, stay away from it and there will be no attacks. Yes. So the passage is not talking about the natural aggression. Yes. The question is, what is a significant factor that contributes to the habituation? What is it that causes them to get used to? Okay, so this is not something that is in consideration at all for the habituation. What is it that gets a carnivores used to the human presence? Yes, that is what the question is asking you. So you could say that option 2 doesn't answer the question. It is mentioned in the passage, yes, but it doesn't answer the question. Okay, then you have option 3, which says the increased scarcity of sources due to climate change forcing carnivores to venture outside their natural habitats in search of sustenance. Okay, now the increased scarcity of resources. Now this is actually, while yes, climate change talks, it says that they believe that climate change plays a part, but the correlation still needs to be ironed out. The correlation, what exactly is the correlation between climate change and human carnivore conflicts? Yes, so he says the correlation still needs to be ironed out. Whereas option 3 is very clearly saying forcing carnivores to venture outside their natural habitats in search of sustenance. So this is twisting the passage. Yes, that's why it's not option 3 either. The answer will be option 4, which says the reduction in carnivores' instinctive fear response resulting from their reliance upon human provided food. So you get this answer from paragraph 2, okay, which says then there are animal attacks provoked by people taking pictures with them or feeding them in natural settings such as national parks, which often end with animals being euthanized out of precaution. Okay, eventually that animal becomes habituated to people. Okay, and then bad things happen to the animal, unfortunately, right? It's not the human beings who the human beings suffer maybe because of their actions. The animal again suffers because of the human beings actions, is what this paragraph tells us. Yes, so this is where we get the answer from. There is a reduction. The more they see the people, the less they are. So they say they're euthanized out of precaution. Euthanized meaning that fear response is removed, right? So option 4 is the best choice. Okay, We have question 9, which says, given the insights provided by Penteriani's research and Wilkinson's statement, which of the following conclusions can be drawn about the relationship between landscape heterogeneity and human carnivore conflicts? Okay, so this is from the last paragraph. Let's just go through it. The likelihood of human carnivore conflicts appears to be higher in areas of low income countries dominated by vast rural landscapes and farmland, according to Penteriani's research. Okay, so according to his research, what is it? The likelihood, the possibility of the human carnivore conflicts appear to be higher in what kind of areas? Low income countries dominated by vast rural landscapes and farmland. Okay, what is Wilkinson's statement? There are a lot of working landscapes in the global south that are really heterogeneous. Heterogeneous here is the implication that human beings and animals sort of share the landscape. Okay, heterogeneous, that are interspersed with, that's how we know that is heterogeneous, that are interspersed with carnivore habitats, forests and savannas, which creates a lot more opportunity for these encounters just statistically. All right, so which of the following conclusions can be drawn about this? The first option says landscape heterogeneity, characterized by a mix of farmland and natural habits, inherently reduces the chances. So, this is actually contradicting the passage. Okay. Low income countries with vast contiguous is adjoining, continuing. Okay. Wilderness areas are less prone to human carnivore conflicts because these areas lack the human presence necessary for such encounters. No, again, a contradiction of what is stated, right? Because he says there is farmland and there are rural areas. All right. The diversity and interspersion of working landscapes with carnivore habitats in rural areas increase the statistical probability of encounters between humans and carnivores. So, this conveys what is mentioned. The diversity and interspersion of working landscapes. Interspersion is, you may have a working landscape and then maybe a forest area, right? So on and so forth. Yes. So, with carnivore habitats in rural areas mentioned, increase the statistical probability, yes, Wilkinson's statement says that, of encounters between humans and carnivores. All right. Option 4 talks about homogeneous landscapes, whereas the passage is talking about heterogeneous landscapes. Yes, so we mark option 3. All right. According to the passage, which of the following scenarios would most likely exacerbate is increase, worsen, right, the frequency of carnivore human conflicts? In this paragraph, after conducting countless postmortems, okay, on all types of carnivore human attacks spanning 75 years, Penteriani's team believes 50% could have been avoided if humans reacted differently. Okay. The study found that engaging in risky behavior around large carnivores increases the likelihood of an attack. Okay, so risky behavior around large carnivores. Two of the most common risky behaviors, okay, two of the most common risky behaviors are parents leaving their children to play outside unattended and walking an unleashed dog. Leaving their children to play outside unattended and walking an unleashed dog, according to the study. Wilkinson says 66% of coyote attacks involve a dog. Okay, people end up in a situation where their dog is being chased or their dog chases a coyote, or maybe they're walking their dog near a den that's marked and the coyote wants to escort them away. Right, so this is the situation. All right. So, what is the answer we get? Addressing the impact of climate change on the availability of resources for wildlife. Why would that increase the frequency of carnivore human conflicts? If there is a connection between climate change and carnivore human conflicts, addressing the impact of climate change should make it better, not make it worse. Yes, therefore, it is not option 1. Unleashing dogs by pet owners in areas with known high concentrations of carnivores. Yes, right? So, in areas, that's what we just read, leaving dogs off the leash in areas where there are known to be high concentrations of large carnivores will definitely increase the conflict. Yes. Implementing food waste management strategies to prevent wild animals being attracted to human sources. Yes, that's a good thing. right? So if it is preventing wild animals from getting into human food, yeah, you're implementing food waste management strategies, then that's again a good thing, right? Then attempting to photograph wild animals from within secured viewing areas, secured, so it is properly planned, right? They are designated areas where the appropriate precautions have been taken. So why would that worsen the situation? It would make the situation better. Yes, therefore option 2 is the best choice. All right, we have here another passage, quite an interesting passage based on history. So, again, with reading comprehension, of course, what you find interesting is very subjective, but the passage is not a very difficult one to read. Yes, the questions again are a little tricky, that they are application questions. So, you have to read the questions carefully and read the options carefully and choose accordingly. But the passage itself is not difficult to get. All right. The passage talks about spices, about how spices were always considered something exotic, right? There was a demand for them in Europe, how, how the exchange of spices, how the trading of spices started, went on, so on and so forth. Yes. So let's see what the questions say. Yes. In the context of the passage, the people who heard the story of pepper trees being guarded by snakes would be least likely to arrive at the conclusion that, right? So that, as I said, it's about the questions are definitely tricky. Yes, so it's something that you'll have to read carefully. So let's first go to the paragraph that talks about this. Yes, so since they are application based questions, since they are questions that more or less deal with specific parts of the passage, we'll pick up a paragraph at a time. So this paragraph is the one that yields the information we need to answer this question. Okay, so this says geographical knowledge has a lot to do with the perceptions of spices' relative scarcity. Okay, so mind you, their perceptions, yes, their perceptions of spices' relative scarcity and the reasons for their high prices. Okay, so geographical knowledge has a lot to do with that, with the points of view, the ideas that people had about the relative scarcity of spices and why the prices were so high. An example, okay, of the varying notions of scarcity is the conflicting information about how pepper is harvested, right? So one reason for it was the conflicting information. Nobody had a clear account of how pepper was harvested. As far back as the 7th century, Europeans thought that pepper in India grew on trees guarded by serpents. Okay, look at the story. Mind you, we're talking about the medieval period, more or less. Yes, and also a few centuries, 1 or 2 centuries after that. But yes, so guarded by serpents that would bite and poison anyone who attempted to gather the fruit. The only way to harvest pepper was to burn the trees. Okay, the only way to harvest, how did we get the pepper? Because the pepper grew on trees which was guarded by serpents. Yes, that would bite and poison anybody who tried to get it. So the only way to get the pepper was to burn the trees, which would drive the snakes underground. Of course, this bit of lore story, all right, would explain the shriveled black peppercorns, but not white, pink, or other colors. Yes. So how do we normally see the pepper? They're black and dried up, right? So he says the story was consistent with how the pepper looked. Yes, because you burn down the tree and the peppercorns become dry and shriveled. Yes, that's the idea. So now the question is asking us, in the context of the passage, the people who heard the story of pepper trees being guarded by snakes would be least likely to arrive at the conclusion that. Okay, so what does it tell us? Now, the first one says it is no surprise that the pepper supply is so limited. Okay, now we are looking for the conclusion that we are least likely to arrive at. That's another thing that you have to be very careful about. Most likely, least likely, except. Yes, watch out for these words. So it is no surprise that the pepper supply is so limited. Now they would arrive at that conclusion that the pepper supply, there's nothing surprising about the pepper supply being limited, because it is so difficult to get the pepper, guarded by serpents who will bite or poison anybody who tries to touch it. So the trees have to be burned down, right? So this is definitely a conclusion that they would arrive at. Then, it is not advisable to go to India to harvest the pepper themselves. Definitely not. You need a certain amount of expertise if the trees are being guarded by the serpents and the trees need to be burned down in order to get the pepper. It's not for everyone to be able to do. All right. Pepper is costly for good reason. Yes. Right. If it is so difficult to get, then obviously pepper will be costly. Yes. So option 4, this is why pepper is so hot. Okay. Now, what hot are we talking about? This, since we're talking about pepper, a spice, we're most probably talking about, how spicy it is. Yes. It is in that sense. We're not talking about hot and cold, right? That is not the idea. So either way, I would say, option, the use of the word hot here itself gives rise to ambiguity, and the other three can very clearly be inferred. Yes. So this is an application question that can, if you identify, if you have read the passage, you remember where what information is present, you can go back and check if necessary, and you'll find that 1, 2, and 3 are definitely, they're conclusions that can be arrived at easily. All right. Yes. If a trader brought white peppercorns, so here's another. So these are all questions that are asking you further application questions, as they're known, right? That there is an idea mentioned in the passage, and then you stretch that idea, maybe take it one step forward, and what are the conclusions that can be drawn? Okay. So if a trader brought white peppercorns, now that same paragraph, I refer you back to this paragraph, I refer you back to this sentence. The only way to harvest pepper was to burn the trees, which would drive the snakes underground. Of course, this bit of law would explain the shriveled black peppercorns, but not white, pink, or other colors. Yes. So the pepper that they got was shriveled and black. Now, what would happen if a trader brought white peppercorns from India to medieval Europe? All of the following are unlikely to happen except. So please take note of that, right? Even more complicated, that all of the following. So there are 3 that are unlikely to happen. 1 is likely to happen. Okay. That is essentially what it is asking us. Yes. The first one is the price of spices would decrease, right? Well, this is unlikely to happen. Why would the price of spices decrease just because he brought white peppercorns? If anything, I would say, they're expecting black peppercorns, and suddenly here's an even more exotic. That itself is considered exotic. Here's something that's even more exotic, because according to the story they've heard, you only get it in that black shriveled form, which, because the trees have been burned down, right? So now here we're getting white spices. So if anything, the demand would increase. Yes. But it is highly unlikely that the prices would decrease. Yes, because it is still considered exotic. All right. So option 1, it is difficult to get again, right? So that's another thing. So the supply would still not be there, probably not enough as such. Yes. So the prices are unlikely to decrease. Then Europeans would doubt the story of pepper harvesting. This is something that is likely to happen, because till now they've been told that, the tree is guarded by serpents, so the tree has to be burned down to drive the snakes underground and then harvest the pepper. By then, because the tree is burned down, the pepper would be dry and shriveled. Yes. But here, if the trader brings white peppercorns, then yes, Europeans would probably doubt the story of the pepper harvesting. Yes. Pepper would no longer be considered exotic. Why not? Right? If anything, it would be considered even more exotic, as I explained with option 1. Then, medieval maps would be used as navigational aids. Well, there is a mention of medieval maps in the, I would say, third paragraph. Yes, right. So this is where it is mentioned, medieval maps. The only information we get here is medieval maps often placed India close to the so-called earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden described in the Bible. What is the connection of medieval maps and white pepper? There is no connection there. Right. So just because white peppercorns are brought, why would medieval maps now be used as navigational aids? Were they not used as navigational aids earlier? Right. We don't know. We just don't have enough information about it. Right. So that is also unlikely to happen, I would say. Yes. Definitely not likely to happen, which is what we are looking for, because we're looking for the except. Yes. So option 2 is the answer. All right. It can be inferred that all of the following contributed. Okay, all of the following contributed to a decline in the allure of spices, except allure is the attraction. Okay, so what is it that caused the attraction to spices to reduce? Okay, there are 3 statements that would have caused a decrease in the attraction to spices. 1, Did not. Okay, let's see. The development of refrigeration techniques, yes, right? The development of refrigeration techniques would definitely have reduced the attraction of spices, because spices became attractive to Europeans in the first place because, they helped to cover the taste of spoiled meat. Yes, medieval purchasers consumed meat much fresher than what the average city dweller in the developed world of today has at hand. However, refrigeration was not available, and some hot spices have been shown to serve as an antibacterial agent. Yes, so basically, salting, smoking, or drying meat were other means of preservation. Yes, so if refrigeration techniques were developed, then they no longer needed the spices to help preserve the meat. Yes, so this would have contributed to a decline in the allure of spices. Changes in European cuisine. Yes, so this also, because they were used. So if you go on to read that passage, that paragraph, it says most spices used in cooking began as medical ingredients, and throughout the Middle Ages, spices were used as both medicines and condiments. Above all, medieval recipes involve the combination of medical and culinary lore. Culinary is cooking, lore is, history, stories, in order to balance food's humoral properties and prevent disease. Most spices were hot and dry, and so appropriate in sauces to counteract the moist and wet properties supposedly possessed by both meat and fish. So this gives you options, 2 and 3, changes in European cuisine and changes in the system of medical treatment, right? Therefore, increase in the availability of spices. Why would an increase in the availability of spices contribute to a decline in the allure? Mind you, they're not talking about, the attraction, right? The question is asking you about the attraction to spices. It very clearly says, the passage tells us that spices were considered an exotic commodity, right? Yes, there were uses, right? They found uses for it, and it found, so that added to the attraction, right? So if those reasons were removed, then maybe the attraction would decline a little bit, but an increase in the availability would not make it any less exotic. Yes, that's why option 4 is the answer. Okay, in the context of the passage, which of the following conclusions cannot be reached? Okay, so which conclusion cannot be reached? India was colonized for its spices and gold. Okay, well, for one thing, while there is a mention of Christopher Columbus and this thing, yeah, it does talk about India, but it talks about spices. Yes, it doesn't say anything about gold. Yes, so this is the answer, but let's look at the others. Let's rule them out. The spice trade was a driver of colonial expansion. Yes, this you get from the first 2 3 paragraphs. Spices were a global commodity before European voyages. Yes, there was a complex chain of relations, yet consumers had little knowledge of producers and vice versa. Desire for spices helped fuel European colonial empires to create political, military, and commercial networks under a single power. Right? So there you get your answer. That's option 2. Tobacco was more marketable than spices. Yes, this is mentioned again in the passage. If you look at the last paragraph, it says spices never had the enduring is lasting, allure or power of gold and silver. This is the mention of gold, right? It doesn't say that India was colonized for its gold, or the commercial potential of new products such as tobacco, indigo, or sugar. Okay, so spices didn't have the enduring, the lasting allure of power, of the power of gold or silver, or the commercial potential. So tobacco was more marketable than spices. Yes, that's what it tells us. Okay, then colonialism was motivated by the demand for spices, which again you more or less get from the first paragraph. Yes, so the only one we don't get from here is that India was colonized for its spices and gold. Okay, so option 1 is the answer. Okay, we have here another summary question, right? Let's see what this one says. Different from individuals, states conduct warfare operations using the dime model. Okay, so different from individuals, how do states conduct warfare operations? Using the dime model. The dime model is mentioned here, right? It's an acronym that stands for diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Most states do everything they can to inflict pain and confusion on their enemies before deploying the military. So that's the last choice, right? In fact, Attacks on vectors are carriers of information, are a well-known tactic of war, well-known tactic of war, and usually the first target when the charge begins. Yes, so the first thing to be attacked are the vectors of information, the carriers of information. All right. It's common for telecom data and communications networks to be routinely monitored by governments, which is why the open data policies of the web are so concerning. Open data policies are so concerning to many advocates of privacy and human rights. Within the worldwide adoption of social media, more governments are getting involved in low grade information warfare through the use of cyber troops. So basically, these sentences are elaborating on the idea of how the first attack is on the vectors of information. Okay. According to a study by the Oxford Internet Institute in 2020, cyber troops are government or political party actors tasked with manipulating public opinion online. Okay, so they are, who are cyber troops? Cyber troops are people who have been government or political party actors, people who are part of the government or political parties who have been given the duty or given the task of manipulating public opinion online. The Oxford Research Group was able to identify 81 countries with active cyber troop operations, utilizing many different strategies to spread false information, including spending millions on online advertising. Okay, so let's see what we get. Governments primarily use the DIME model, right? Nowhere does it say primarily. Yes, to deploy cyber troops who practice low grade information warfare, seeking to manipulate public opinion with the objective of inflicting pain and confusion, right? Look at how it twists the words from the passage, right? It says that they do everything they can to inflict pain and confusion on the enemy before deploying the military. That's the connection in which this particular phrase has been used. But here it has been inverted completely, therefore it twists the passage. Yes. Following the DIME model, many governments have taken advantage of open data policies of the web to deploy cyber troops who manipulate domestic public opinion, right? So this is one reason, definitely, domestic public opinion. See, it is warfare. So why would it be domestic public opinion? Yes. So, and it is not mentioned in the passage also. It only says manipulating public opinion online, right? So this is too specific, and it is going again, it is going beyond the scope of the passage, right? Also, to say that following this model, they have taken advantage of open data policies. Yes. So again, the connection between following the DIME model and governments taking advantage is not established in the passage. Then option 3 says, using the DIME model together with military operations, many governments simultaneously conduct. No, the passage very clearly tells us that the military is the last one to be deployed. Yes. So option 4 has to be our answer. As part of conducting information warfare, as per the DIME model, many governments routinely monitor telecom data and communications networks and use cyber troops on social media to manipulate public opinion. This is the only one that doesn't twist the passage and covers the main points of the passage. All right. We have here another passage. Let's see what it says. This passage is talking about something that the author calls the secondary, the unintended consequences, okay, and secondary effects. Okay, what he also says, economists sometimes call externalities. Okay, so what are these things? Now, this passage is essentially a discussion of how something is invented, and because of that, there are certain what he calls externalities. There are certain unintended consequences. The invention intended something, but there was also an unintended result of that, a consequence of that, and also secondary effects which were not really intended, right? Could not really be foreseen. Now, you can't tell immediately whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. He says the true effect of that we can see only later, right? Only after a longer period. Okay, so that's what this passage is about. The question says, we can assume that the author would support all of the following views except, okay, would support all of the following views except. Now, the first one says, it has become far easier for people today to bring out innovations with dire worldwide consequences than it was earlier. Okay, so dire is dangerous. Yes, so dire worldwide consequences than it was earlier. It has become easier, it says. Yes, so if you read this paragraph, right, ethyl, which is leaded fuel, and freon belong to the same general class of secondary effect. Innovations whose, so he explains it here, innovations whose unintended consequences stem from some kind of waste byproduct that they emit. But the potential health threats of ethyl were visible in 1920s. Okay, unlike say the long-term effects of atmospheric carbon buildup in the early days of the industrial revolution, right? So it has become far easier today for people today to bring out innovations with dire world consequences than it was earlier, right? So this is one example we get. Yes, so he also, you also see this, it says we live under the gathering storm of modern history's most momentous unintended consequence, carbon based climate change. Yes, so yes, this is one that the author would support. Then the emissions caused by the large scale use of leaded fuel ought to have been addressed earlier than they were. Okay, yes, right. So he says the potential health threats were visible in the 1920s. Okay, in the 1920s, unlike, say, the long term effects of atmospheric carbon buildup. So, this we get from, again, the second sentence of this paragraph, because it says, yes, they were visible, the effects were visible in the 1920s. So, then itself, something could have been done about it, right? So, yes, option 2 also can be concluded that it can be concluded that the author would support that. Option 3 says, while technological advances in the past have had innocuous is harmful, or beneficial, helpful outcomes, more recent advances have the potential to be more threatening globally. This is not something that the author would support, because the author says even back then, right? So 1920s, right? Ethyl, he says the effects of the potential threats were visible even then, right? So no, he wouldn't say that the technological advances in the past have had harmless or even helpful outcomes. Yes, so option 3 is not one that he would support. The byproducts of leaded fuel rather than the fuel itself were responsible for the buildup of carbon related gases in the atmosphere. Yes, so this is another thing that the author would agree, because he's talking about the byproducts, right? The leaded fuel, yes. Now the unintended consequences are the byproducts. Yes, so that is the that's something that the author would agree. All right. 17 says the author lists all of the following examples as externalities of major technical advances except. Okay. So this is mentioned in the first paragraph. If you remember, I had pointed out that word. Yes. So let's go through the first paragraph. The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed. Yes. So, you have a great advance, you have an achievement, but there is also a shadow on it, meaning there is a negative aspect to it, by a less predictable history of unintended consequences and secondary effects, what economists sometimes call externalities. Sometimes those consequences are innocuous ones or even beneficial. Mind you, again, if you look at the previous question, I'll just go back to it for a second, right? The option 3 mentioned innocuous or beneficial outcomes, right? This is where these words have been taken from. But what is the sentence saying? Sometimes those consequences are innocuous or even beneficial, but it is not saying that technological advances in the past have had beneficial or innocuous outcomes, now they are dire. That's not what he says, right? He says generally speaking, the consequences, these unintended consequences and effects, are innocuous or even beneficial. Gutenberg invents, now these are the examples. Gutenberg invents the printing press and literacy rates rise. Yes, so printed material was more. Gutenberg invented the printing press. Yes, so what happened? Literacy rates rose because it was more accessible to people. Yes, which causes a significant part of the reading public to require spectacles. Look at the unintended consequence of that. Because reading increased, more and more people required spectacles, which creates a surge of investment in lens making across Europe. That's beneficial, right? Because it was business, yes, which leads to the invention of the telescope and the microscope. Again, beneficial. right? So what are the externalities? What are the secondary effects? The externalities. Yes. So what are they? Buildup of chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere. Okay. So yes, this is definitely something that would have happened as an externality. Then extension of the phonograph, okay, to large scale recording of music. Yes, right? Then application of the Jacquard loom to modern IT programming. This also would have happened. Yes, actually this extends, right? So this idea extends into the second paragraph because it says the question says the author lists all of the examples. So what does it say? The secondary effects seem to belong to an entirely different sphere of society. Yes. So these are the secondary effects, which are the externalities. Yes. So this is actually what we should look at. When Willis Carrier hit upon the idea of air conditioning, the technology was primarily intended for industrial use. Yes. So we're talking about the externalities. So the technology was primarily intended for industrial use, ensuring cool, dry air for factories that required low humidity environments. But it touched off one of the largest migrations. So, what were the secondary effects? The intention was for industrial use. Yes, but the secondary effects were largest migrations in the history of United States, enabling the rise of metropolitan areas like Phoenix and Las Vegas that barely existed when Carrier started tinkering with the idea in the 1900s. Yes, so what would have happened? There would have been a buildup of chlorofluorocarbons. Yes, extension of the phonograph to large scale recording of music, application of the Jacquard loom to modern IT programming, right? So we get these from the first two paragraphs. Cooling and dehumidifying of factories through air conditioning is what was intended. It was not the unintended. Yes. So it is not the externality. It was not the secondary effect. Carrier, Babbage, and Edison are mentioned in the passage to illustrate the author's point that. Okay, so this is where these three people are mentioned. So read the first sentence of that paragraph. It says, sometimes the unintended consequence comes about when consumers use an invention in a surprising way. Okay, so sometimes the unintended consequence comes about when the inventor intended it to be used in one way, but it turned out that people used it another way. What is it? Edison famously thought his phonograph, which he sometimes called the talking machine. So here's the externality that was mentioned in the previous question. He sometimes called the talking machine would primarily be used to take dictation. But then later, innovators discovered a much larger audience willing to pay for musical recordings made on descendants of Edison's original invention. In other cases, the original invention comes into the world disguised as a plaything, the way animatronic dolls of the mid 1700s inspired Jacquard. So, this is the other example that was given in the previous question, to invent the first programmable loom, and Charles Babbage to invent the first machine that fit the modern definition of a computer, setting the stage for revolution in programmable technology that would transform the 21st century in countless ways. Yes, and Carrier is mentioned in the second paragraph. Yes, so from these two paragraphs, what do we get? What is the point that he's trying to make? The secondary effect of past inventions mostly resulted in the creation of new inventions. It's not new inventions, it's a use that the inventor himself had not proposed or seen. Okay. Despite the original intention, the unintended consequences of the inventions were largely beneficial, right? Now, this is not beneficial, is not mentioned in this context. Yes, that is not the point that the author is trying to make with the mention of Babbage, Carrier, and Edison. Right. These inventors could not have visualized the eventual impact of their inventions on society. Okay. So this, yes, because they intended it to be used in one way, it turned out to have much far larger or greater uses. Inventions typically being end up used for entirely different purposes than the intended ones. Yes, this looks like it might come close, but they're not saying entirely different, right? It just says that it stretches the given usage. Yes, so that is the point that is being made. It doesn't say that they end up being used for entirely different purposes. Yes, so option 3 is the best choice. Okay, which of the following best conveys the main point of the first paragraph? All right. So, what did the first paragraph say? The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed by a less predictable history of unintended consequences and secondary effects. Sometimes those consequences are innocuous or even beneficial. It goes on to talk about Gutenberg. Okay. So, which one would convey the main point? The secondary effects of most major technological advances in the past, especially if they were unintended, have turned out to be beneficial, right? So this one doesn't say that the secondary effects, especially if they were unintended, have turned out to be beneficial, right? He says sometimes they are beneficial, okay? And this is not the main point again. The full impact of technological advances cannot be estimated in the short run, okay, as the ripple effects often extend far beyond the original intent. Yes, so this is the answer, because that's what the author says by saying, how it's a ripple effect, right? So it is intended in one way, there are unintended consequences and secondary effects which lead to further innovations and inventions, right? So the effects cannot be seen immediately, right? Option 3 says it is important to judge an invention not by its immediate outcomes, but by the holistic impact of its secondary effects. This is too specific, right? The holistic impact of its secondary effects. No, it's more that what is this holistic impact, right? For that we need time to pass. That is not indicated in option 3. Yes, and option 4 says the entire impact of a technological advances should be evaluated by the boost its secondary effects gives to generating further technological advances is way beyond the scope of this passage. Option 2 is the best choice. We have here another passage. This passage is maybe a little tricky, yes, because it talks about something that is not a commonly discussed subject. Yes, it talks about a peer reviewer, right? So, who's a peer reviewer? A peer reviewer is somebody within the same field who evaluates the work of his colleagues, his or her colleagues. Yes. So it starts out by saying the job of a peer reviewer is thankless, right? Why is it thankless? It goes on to give certain reasons. Yes. And, it's a discussion of whether the peer reviewing process is beneficial. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What are the reasons that they may do so? All right. So we have the first question. Based on the passage, we can infer that the author would most probably support. Okay, what would he most probably support? Which idea? Yes, greater transparency across the peer review process in academic publishing. Okay, so would the author support this idea? Right, that is definitely something that the author would support. You get this answer very clearly from the last paragraph, which says, of course, opening up data underlying the reviewing process will not fix peer review entirely, and there may be instances in which there are valid reasons to keep the content of peer reviews hidden and the identity of the referees confidential. But the norm should shift from opacity. Opacity is the opposite of transparency. Yes. So from opacity in all cases to opacity only when necessary. Okay. So this definitely signifies that the author would recommend, would support greater transparency across the peer review process. Yes. Option 2 says more careful screening to ensure the recruitment of content familiar. This is something that is beyond the scope of this passage. Publicizing peer review data rather than the publication of actual reviews is just using twisting words, yes, in order to distort the idea in the passage. Preserving the anonymity of reviewers to protect them from criticism is the exact opposite. He says that while yes, it is necessary in certain cases, he says it should shift from opacity in all cases to opacity only when necessary, right? So when it is necessary, protect the anonymity. Otherwise, it should be transparent. Yes. So option 1 is the best choice. All right. Let's take a look at question 21. According to the passage, some are opposed to making peer reviews public for all of the following reasons, except. Okay. So what are the reasons to oppose making a peer review public? Yes, so you find this in this paragraph, which says opponents of peer review, open peer review, okay, opponents are people who oppose it, commonly argue that confidentiality is vital to the integrity of the review process. Okay, they say that they feel that confidentiality is vital, it's very important to maintaining the integrity, right? Meaning the principles of it, right? So in order to stick to the principles of it, to make sure that there is no cheating, there's no corruption to it, right? It is necessary to keep it confidential. Referees may be less critical of manuscripts if their reports are published, especially if they are revealing their identities by signing them. Some also hold concerns that open reviewing may deter referees from agreeing to judge manuscripts in the first place, right? So that may stop them from agreeing to judge manuscripts in the first place, or that they'll take longer to do so out of fear of scrutiny. All right, so that is option one. Delays the manuscript evaluation process, as reviewers would take longer to write their reviews. So this is definitely one reason to oppose making it public. Okay, deters reviewers from producing honest, if critical, reviews that are vital to the publishing process. Yes, this is also mentioned in this paragraph. All right, makes reviewers reluctant, hesitant to review manuscripts, especially if they are critical. So, praising something is okay, right? But when you're criticizing something, and if you have to do it openly, right, some people might hesitate to do so. All right, so option 4 is the only one that is not given as a reason, leaves the reviewers unexposed to unwarranted and unjustified criticism or comments from others. Okay, so they are opposed to making the reviews public for the reason that it leaves reviewers unexposed, right? Why? If they are unexposed, why would they oppose it? Yes, so this is the only one that doesn't apply. Okay, let's take a look at this question. According to the passage, which of the following is the only reason not given in favor of making peer review data public? Okay, which one is the only reason not given in favor? So let's take a look at the first option. It will deal with peer review fraud, such as authors publishing bogus reviews. Bogus is fake reviews of their work, right? So someone could very well, fake an identity in order to give a review of their own work. All right, so this is a reason that is given by the author. It is mentioned at the end of this paragraph, right? So it says openly publishing peer review data could perhaps also help journals address another problem in academic publishing: fraudulent, bogus peer reviews. For instance, a minority of authors have been known to use phony email addresses to pose as an outside expert and review their own manuscripts. Yes, so option 1 is a reason given in favor of making peer review data public. It would highlight the gender and race biases currently existing in the selection of reviewers. Okay, this you get from the first part of the same paragraph, right, which says peer review data could also help root out bias. Yes, it goes on to mention that it is gender bias. All right, so that is also available. Yes, then you have option 3, which says it could address various inefficiencies and fraudulent practices that continue in academic publishing process. Okay, this you get from the previous paragraph. It says sharing peer review data could help journals stamp out fraud, inefficiency, and systemic bias in academic publishing. Yes, so option 4, which says it can tackle the problem of selecting appropriately qualified reviewers for academic writing. Yes, it can tackle the problem. Now, this is not a reason that is given in favor of making peer review data public. Let's look at this one. All of the following are listed as reasons why academics chose to review other scholars' work, except. Yes, so this passage, as you can see, the questions are not, they are all information based ones, right? So if you know what information is where in the passage, skim the passage, look for information, maybe make a note either physically or mentally of what information is where, and then go to the questions. This is quite doable. All right, so question 23 says all of them are listed as reasons why academics chose to review other scholars' work, except. Okay, so you look at paragraph 2, yes, which says in recent years, some scientists have begun posting their reviews online, mainly to claim credit for their work. Okay, sites like Publons allow researchers to either share entire referee reports or simply list the journals for whom they have carried out a review. Okay, goes on to say academics are increasingly placing value on the work of peer review, asking others such as funders to do the same. While that's vital in the publish or perish culture of academia, there's also immense value in the data underlying peer review. Sharing peer review data could help journals stamp out fraud, inefficiency, and systemic bias in academic publishing. The fourth option, it is seen as a form of service to the academic community, right? So you get this option 4 as a reason. Okay, then it helps keep them current with cutting edge ideas in their academic publishing. Okay, so this you get from here, right? Some do it. If you look at the first paragraph, it says some do it as a way to keep abreast with developments in their field, that is keep up with the developments in their field. Some simply do it as a see it as a duty to the discipline, right? So that is option 4, actually, very clearly, form of service. Okay, and keeps them current with cutting edge ideas is developments. All right, so you get options 1 and 4. Then you have some use this as an opportunity to publicize their own review work, right? So that you get from the second paragraph. Yes, so you get those 3. The only one that you don't get is option 3, which says it is seen as an opportunity to expand their influence in the academic community, right? So it is choosing to review their other scholars' work is not an opportunity to expand their influence. This is not something that is mentioned in the passage. We go on to the last question, which is an odd sentence paragraph question. Okay, so let's see what we have here. No known real researcher of human behavior that gender is all nature or all nurture, right? So no known real researcher, right? So anybody who knows anything about it is not going to say that gender is all nature or all nurture, right? Nature is natural, nurture is upbringing. Yes, the evidence for a biological basis for gender certainty doesn't mean we should be complacent in the face of sexism. Okay, so it talks about the biological basis for gender. Okay, and it says we should be, it doesn't mean that we should be complacent, that is we should be we should accept, right? Quietly, without protesting, we should accept sexism. Okay, many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct is social construct means something that is made up by society. Yes, so many people are uncomfortable with that idea that it is not only a socially made concept. Okay, despite this empirical is something that is based on observation and research. So even though there is this empirical truth, right? What is this empirical truth? Researchers who study the biological basis of gender often face political pushback. Okay, so there is some sort of protest from the political arena. Yes, there is a political preference for gender to be only a reflection. Okay, a reflection of social factors, and so entirely malleable, right? So there is, there is a certain faction, a group that believes, right, in politics, that believes that gender should be a reflection of social factors, and because of that it is malleable, meaning it can be molded as per our wishes. Yes, so the theme of the passage as such that we get, right, from the 4 sentences that we should get, is the idea of gender, right? That's the topic. Yes, so is gender all nature or all nurture? Is there a biological basis? Is it a social construct? Yes, and there is the interference or the let's say the influence of politics also on that. Yes, so if you look at sentence 1, which talks about all gender being all nature or all nurture, which is the biological or the social construct, so there's a connection. Many people are uncomfortable with the idea that gender is not purely a social construct. Yes, so it is not all nurture. Despite this empirical truth, researchers who study the biological basis often face political pushback, and 5 also talks about political preference. So there's definitely a connection between 4 and 5. There's a connection between 1 and 3. Yes. Though 2 mentions biological basis for gender, it doesn't, none of the other sentences talk about sexism. Yes. So the one that is odd, the odd one out is sentence 2. Yes. So this odd sentence question is much easier to do because there is a clear connection. If you look for the one odd word out, right, which is sexism. Yes, it talks about biological basis for gender, as I said, but it doesn't, none of the other sentences are bringing in the aspect of sexism. Yes, and whether we should accept sexism or not. Yes, so option 2 is the best choice.